ago that 3 million documents relating to the activities of Jeffrey Epstein had been released by the US Department of Justice, and all weekend, really, you have seen some of the ramifications of that release for the upper echelons of British society. Andrew Windsor pictured on all fours leaning over a woman, Mandelson's emails, his financial support from Epstein that he says he can't remember, and the leaking of sensitive government emails while he was a cabinet minister to Epstein. All of those now have emerged into the public spotlight. Worth saying here, of course, that being named in the files, having your emails detailed in them, is not in and of itself wrongdoing. But there was clearly wrongdoing afoot, wasn't there? Both Epstein and Maxwell were imprisoned after all. There is so much information out there now, and I spent parts of the weekend trying to find good sources of lots of it, seeing this stuff floating around social media and wondering whether half of it was actually true. I found it quite hard to get a handle on all of it, and actually what it tells us about what all of this was. What was this thing that Epstein was clearly at the centre of? Was it a way of entrapping the rich, the famous, the powerful through the provision of mainly girls, but possibly drugs, certainly money? To what end were people drawn towards Epstein? What was the goal? The goal was to influence, the goal was to extort. What was the nature of this? And how and why does it seem to have been so successful in luring almost anyone that you've ever heard of? Certainly people at the top end of politics, this side and the other side of the Atlantic, whether it's Bill Clinton who's named in them, whether it's Donald Trump who's named in them. And again, naming doesn't mean wrongdoing. But Epstein's web was enormous. 03456060973 is the number. I want to spend part of this hour getting into the details of what was actually released over the course of Friday and the weekend, and what it tells us about what Epstein was doing and why he might have been doing it and who it was happening to. And I want to get your questions answered as well. If you've been going through some of this, whether it's the salacious stuff or the stuff that actually I think is going to require some police oversight, what is all of this? Ankush Khardori will join us this hour, senior writer for Politico magazine, former federal prosecutor at the US Department of Justice. Good to see you, Ankush. Thank you very much indeed for coming on. Before we get into some of what you have gleaned from the latest release of all this information, walk us through what you cite as the 5 key things to understand before looking at all of this information.
Well, yeah, I think you're referring to a column I wrote as this stuff was first getting rolled out. And, I talked a little bit about some of the things actually that you've already touched upon, which is like, be very careful about what you're seeing pulled out of this material, particularly because there may be fakes circulating around on social media. Be very careful drawing conclusions from, sporadic documents or, material from here and there, because you should think about how you would want to be treated in that context. If your emails were grabbed up, you'd want to be spoken to about them, and you'd want to be able to say, no, Jeffrey Epstein, this criminal, terrible person, don't take everything he says at face value. So, and also, where's Trump, I think was an interesting question to me, particularly early on. It seems like they buried the stuff that was really bad for Trump until they could put it out into this latest, biggest tranche. But as you said, again, just mere naming, including as to Trump, does not mean there's any criminal conduct going on. And I think there's been no evidence of criminal conduct on the part of Trump in connection with this disclosure. So those were the general sort of rules I was sort of cautioning people, because this is, and also another one you touched upon, really, really important, try to maintain the distinction between criminal misconduct and offensive, even morally offensive conduct. So you would say, I'm never voting for this person. I'm not, giving this person my business anymore. I'm getting off that person's social media platform, versus criminal conduct, because, in the US, this was sold by our lawmakers, and particularly the sponsors of this bill, Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie, as an exercise that would reveal to the public and the world a whole bunch of criminals, powerful, famous, well-connected, rich criminals who were part of an Epstein class, as Ro Khanna put it on television a couple months ago. Thus far, now this process is not over. There's still a bunch of redacted material that Democrats need to get access to. But thus far, it seems like we've uncovered a grand total of 0 people who committed additional crimes under U.S. law. We can talk about the issue in the UK separately. And so yesterday Khanna goes on television saying, oh, look at how bad these people are for socializing with Epstein after his initial criminal conviction. I mean, we are very far afield from what these lawmakers promised us and what they've actually given us. Honestly, they don't even seem that interested in the material that's come out.
It's interesting that because in the run-up to the release of all of these files, but also, of course, the big one on Friday, the rumour mill, I guess, to some extent, had been running away with itself in that we were about to see the naming and shaming of people who were involved in some very, very serious criminality. Now, Epstein looks like he may well have been, and Maxwell is in prison for a very long time. And, of course, Epstein was convicted for soliciting minors, which is a serious crime. So there has been criminality committed. But to your mind, Ankush, going through some of this, you can't see evidence of much stateside.
I cannot. Now, again, this is a process that's ongoing because of the redacted material being out, so I don't want to render a definitive conclusion. No, sure. I just put that right. And also, it's such a large volume of material that, I have the same issue you do, which is like, how do you wrap your head around this in a responsible way? And my advice to people, which is to do what I'm doing, is try to sort of triangulate from a bunch of different credible sources, right? So here in the US, The Times, CNN, Politico, on and on and on, they have reporters who are familiar with the case and can tell us what's new and what's really credible.
So what is this then? What can we say this is definitively?
The production of this material, or what it
what it reveals, what it's meant to do, what it hopes to achieve.
Look, to some extent, I'm like not the best person to answer that question because I opposed this law.
Oh, really?
While it was pending. Yeah, it was a bad idea for all the reasons everyone is now discovering. There is a reason we in the US have never dumped all of the material from a criminal investigation, the raw material from a criminal investigative file, into the public domain. Because it was always going to do what it has done, which is produce more conspiracy theories and more questions. This would have been obvious to anyone who is familiar with human nature, how the internet works, and the linear progression of time. This is what was going to happen with millions of additional documents being dumped. I would say one last thing here, which I think is really important. The victims and the survivors have been horribly mistreated by our government. And this mistreatment has extended through the passage of this law. If our Congress was really serious about the things they claim to be serious about, if Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie were really serious about getting to the bottom of this, they should not have engineered a gigantic document dump for all people to go over forever and generate their own conspiracy theories. They should have set up something like a 9/11 commission, an Epstein commission, where they set up an independent body with some reputable people at the helm, some staff, some resources, some money to go through this material, digest it, and give to the public the sorts of answers that you want and that many other people want, which is how was this investigation done? What did it really uncover? What it didn't? Were there leads that should have been tracked down that weren't? And if so, can we do that now? That would have been a responsible, thoughtful way of doing it. But you know why I'm guessing that didn't happen? Because passing a law that just says dump it into the public domain is free. It doesn't cost Congress anything, and it doesn't require any appropriations. So this was the height of laziness, and I think we're all suffering as a result.
Height of laziness, and also, as you say, possibly means that any serious, or does it, that serious criminality that may have gone on may be found within these emails, not least because they've not all been released.
Well, here's the thing. A raw criminal investigative file, right? This is what I worked on when I was in government. It is not going to, like you just dump it on people, it's not going to give them these sorts of answers you're hungry for. Because what a criminal investigation, it's millions of documents pulled from emails that may or not be relevant, and it contains interview summaries, obviously, but those interview summaries don't tell you, for instance, whether prosecutors and investigators thought those witnesses were credible, or even whether the things that they were saying were true. Right? Those are things that aren't reported in the formal FBI interview summaries. And there are internal prosecution memos and things like that that might shed a little bit more light on what prosecutors really thought about who and who was credible. But on that score, I would just say then if that was really what Congress was interested in, then Congress should have passed a law of just mandated disclosure of that, of draft charging documents, of summaries of evidence, and perhaps the witness interviews. They didn't need to do all of this instead.
The breaking news in the last hour or so is that Lord Mandelson has been reported to the police by the leader of the SNP in Westminster, Stephen Flynn, who's asking that the police investigate what has been shown to have happened in the Epstein Files, which is emails from Mandelson to Epstein whilst Mandelson was a cabinet minister, detailing an email that the then Prime Minister Gordon Brown had received regarding what to do about raising money during the financial crisis in 2008-9. A completely incredible thing for a serving cabinet minister to have done. And if I'm right, Ankush, the chronology of events is that at the time, Epstein was known to have committed various crimes when Mandelson had sent him an email?
Well, yes. I mean, Epstein, if I believe the plea deal was 2007, the conviction entered 2008. Yeah.
So this was at the point at which Epstein had been convicted for soliciting minors. And again, if I sound stuttery over this, it's because I still can't quite hoist it all in. The then business secretary in the cabinet of the British government forwarded to a known criminal who solicited minors an email that went to the British Prime Minister about what to do regarding the sale of government assets. I mean, what?
It's quite remarkable. I mean, I meant to say, this to me, actually, among all of the things I've been reading in recent days about like sort of really legally significant disclosures, actually, this is kind of the most significant one I have seen, because I don't want to venture a view under UK law, right? Because I'm not a UK lawyer. If something comparable happened in a US setting, right, we would probably immediately open a criminal investigation into whether and to what extent there had been an improper disclosure of classified information. And again, I don't know what the framework around the communications there were, but this would be taken very seriously in the US.
I think it's going to depend quite a lot on what the email was classified as, whether it was sent as official sensitive or official confidential, because those two carry quite significant weight. Let's get to calls. Robin's in Whitehaven. Hi, Robin.
Hello. I think my question's probably just been answered. My question is, from what's been put in the domain about the emails alleged between Mandelson and Epstein, do you think it warrants a criminal investigation to see if any laws have been broken?
What do you think, Robin?
Well, from what it's all alleged at the minute in this country, innocent or proven guilty. But it certainly looks bad, and I think it's shocking. I think it's absolutely despicable, and I think there should be a criminal investigation starting today. I'm absolutely shocked that would happen. You know what I mean?
It does raise a bit of a question about kind of whose side are you on? Do you know, there you are serving in the cabinet of the British government, elected there by the people of this country to work on behalf of the nation's interests, and you're forwarding emails to a known sex pest.
Further to this, though, I would like to know when they vetted Starmer for the British ambassador role, what was Starmer told? I think that needs to be made public as well.
That's a good question, and a note that the Prime Minister has said now that he wants to launch an investigation into links between Mandelson and Epstein whilst Mandelson was business secretary. Well, I think, Prime Minister, the horse has rather bolted on that. Don't you think, Ankush?
Sorry, it bolted?
Yeah, the horse has kind of gone. It's running. It's disappeared out the paddock. There's no point. You're not going to get that one back.
Yeah. No, I mean, look, as I said, if this were a comparable U.S. situation, we'd be asking the same questions. But I would just say, again, two things. You already flagged, right? Much would depend, sounds like, for certainly under U.S., sounds like under UK law, under the classification of this particular information within the UK government. But secondarily, again, and your caller hit on this himself, innocent until proven guilty. We should just be very careful jumping to conclusions based on isolated email communications. But isolated email communications are often, in the U.S., enough to start a criminal investigation. So I understand why everyone's angry over there about this. Believe me, we would be too.
Unreal. Robin, thank you for the call. Seamus is in Wallington. Seamus.
Good afternoon, Tom and guest. I'd like to ask a question, if I may. Do you think that the mass dumping of millions of documents is a deliberate act on behalf of Trump and the administration to cause confusion, divert focus, and to concentrate everything on Mandelson and Prince Andrew, although I don't wish to sound like I'm defending either of those two reprehensible characters. But it certainly serves Trump well that the diversion and the looking and the investigation is currently far away from his potential allies, business partners, and political confederates.
Sir, let me tell you, I agree. Last year, when this was all hitting, really escalating in the U.S., and there were questions from the Trump administration, by the Trump administration, about whether they were covering things up, whether they were withholding information about Trump's relationship with Epstein. We've still never really gotten a clean timeline on the relationship and when it broke down. This is what I said. I said the number one thing we ought to be interested in is what is the material in there that concerns Trump, because he is our sitting president, not the other people, but we have a sitting president. We deserve to know what his relationship with this person, particularly because he and his government had been promising this sort of openness for years and then sort of tried to backtrack. I think it is, however, this goes back to, the conversation we were having at the start about whether this law was a good idea. I do not think that it was a deliberate effort because, remember, everyone in Congress, with I think one exception, voted for this. Trump opposed it before finally supporting it. But I think it is a really remarkable unintended indictment of this law that your caller could conclude that it actually was executed to help Trump rather than to illuminate what actually was going on here and his connections. I think it is kind of crazy, actually, from a political standpoint, that Democrats in Congress, particularly Ro Khanna, managed to take an issue that was a significant political liability for Trump and the Republican Party and to universalize it and make it a bipartisan problem for everyone in both parties. It's like a remarkable feat of political malpractice.
What do you think, Seamus?
I think that there is truth to be unfolded. I hope that Mandelson and Andrew are held to account and put the damage that's been done to innocent women and children first, and are compelled by our Prime Minister, not asked, not encouraged, legally compelled by our Prime Minister to support the investigation and face any questioning. And I hope that Trump gets his day in court in terms of what this could mean to him and the people involved in it.
It's a good point about what can compel from the US a former British prince, I guess, or a former British cabinet minister to give evidence. Probably nothing, Ankush.
Correct.
So that's it. The oversight committee say, would you like to come and give evidence? And they obviously say, no, thanks very much. I'm doing anything else.
Look, we have the Congress has subpoena power within the U.S. to compel people in the U.S. to appear. The Congress does not have the extraterritorial power to compel people from any country that they want to come appear in the U.S. So it would have to be voluntary. And if, to be honest, I'm not defending anything, to be very clear here, but if you are these subjects of this investigation, you have no incentive to appear voluntarily before our Congress, because you'll just be raked over the coals and made out to be the villain.
And the last time Andrew Mountbatten Windsor put himself in front of some questioning in front of cameras,
didn't go well.
It really didn't go well. And in fact, one of the things that has been exposed, another thing that has been exposed from this release of emails, is that the suggestion that he broke off communication with Epstein after Epstein had been convicted is just a complete lie, because it shows that emails between Epstein and, quote, the Duke showed that Andrew was inviting Epstein to Buckingham Palace after he'd been convicted and served jail time.
Yes. This to me, look, like I said, this to me is a very a big theme that carries over to a lot of people, which is, how are you still socializing with this person so frequently and intimately after a charge of that seriousness? Now, I will say this is another area where our government failed, because I think one reason people I'm not defending anyone, but I think one reason people felt somewhat comfortable, or if not entirely comfortable, socializing with him was because Epstein was not punished harshly enough in his first case. He got, as you said, it was for solicitation of a minor. He basically served no real prison time. He had a sentence where he was allowed to go out, and I think he had to spend some nights in the prison, whatever. But so our government did not treat it like a serious offense. And so it did not, I think, send a readily available signal to people who weren't intimately.
Why do you think that might have been?
Well, this is another big question that people have had, because there was a U.S. attorney at the time named Alex Acosta who was overseeing that investigation. He went on to serve in the first Trump administration, and when all this came to light, or began to draw some public attention, he had to step down. There have been a lot of questions about why there was this sweetheart deal right, as it's referred to. And there have been various efforts to get at that. I don't think anything has been particularly illuminating. Some people have posited that there was some sort of corruption going on. Other people have posited that Acosta was just maybe in over his head and outmaneuvered by Epstein and his lawyers. I don't know what factual scenario it was, but the outcome is undeniable, which is that he got off way too easy, and in a way that I think made it easier for people to continue associating with him.
Seeing people in 2026 act shocked by the criminality in the Epstein Files is the real story here. For decades, whispers of the rich and powerful involved in unthinkable acts were dismissed as conspiracy theories. Now it's validated. This isn't just corruption, it's a conspiracy of silence protecting the worst crimes. Ankush, is that what we've learnt from this release?
No, it is not what we have learned. Maybe there was a conspiracy, I don't know, but these documents have not established anything of the sort. What they have established is what we've been talking about. Maybe very, very, very poor judgment on the part of a lot of people, maybe criminal misconduct on the part of your official you've been discussing. Look, this to me is the most sort of aggravating element of this, because I think the victims have been poorly treated here. Ro Khanna, Thomas Matt, they promised they were going to reveal criminals involved in child sex trafficking and sex crimes, and covering those things up. And thus far, they've identified a grand total of 0 new criminals. This thus far seems to have been a gigantic waste of time. Now, maybe the remaining material that they're particularly interested in will prove to be the trove of material that is most relevant. Maybe. But the 3.5 million pages or whatever that are out right now,
yes.
Thus far, so no one seems to have come up with anything.
No, but it does seem extremely difficult to believe that there were a number of people engaged in almost daily conversations with very rich, very powerful members, whether it's royalty or politics, both sides of the Atlantic, in which, and the email exchange with Andrew Mountbatten Windsor is interesting in this, Jeffrey Epstein says, I've got a young 26-year-old Russian girl for you to meet and have dinner with. Why the hell is Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, in the position that he is in, meeting a random 26-year-old Russian girl for dinner? And how has this woman, got there?
I don't know the answer to that, right? But on its face, right? Like if this were about a U.S., if that, the same thing where we're talking about a U.S. official, I would say, wow, that is incredibly bad judgment. It sounds like it may have been potentially even a paid escort, but I do not know. What I do know is that on its face, that is not a crime. But it may be things that are so reprehensible that we never want to see this person in public life again, so on and so forth. But we just got to keep these things distinct.
Let's get to Richard in Upminster. Hi, Richard.
Oh, hi, Tom. So, look, I'm wondering, other than, I'm curious about what our so-called security intelligence services knew about this, but my question is, can Mandelson and people like him, can they be prosecuted under Section 2 of the Bribery Act or the FCPA, which is the sort of US equivalent of it, Foreign Corrupt Practices Act? What action can we actually take on this rather than sort of talking about it?
So, I don't know about the UK law. The Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, that is an interesting question, though. I don't think it would really apply here unless, there was actually some sort of bribe going on in official government. I don't think it's quite the charging template that we would apply to a situation like this. I think, look, the most readily available legal consequences for the conduct that has drawn the attention of folks in your country seems to be the law enforcement authorities in your country.
Richard, appreciate it. Thank you. So, what in your mind was this, Ankush, or what was the end goal of what Epstein was doing?
Oh gosh, so my sort of general working hypothesis is that the government, and again, this can be disproven, but it hasn't been yet, that the government basically had it right when they charged him in Maxwell, that these were two reprehensible, terrible people who were abusing and exploiting young women, including potentially with some staff members of Epstein, but not necessarily the bold-faced names that have been tossed around, right? The politicians and the media moguls and the like. So it seems to be, one scenario that I think, is consistent with everything we know is that this man led sort of a very, very remarkable double life. where he was doing these horrendous things while at the same time having sort of insinuated himself into the circle and managing to persuade people that that conviction was sort of meaningless with the help of the government's own signaling itself. So I think that that may have been what happened here, and I think we can say a lot of people exhibited very, very bad judgment, but I just have not seen any, reason that would allow me to comfortably say, well, so-and-so, Bill Clinton, Bill Gates, whoever knew about this. I mean, that's just not what we've seen so far.
Yes, it is unbelievably compromising a position to put oneself into, isn't it? If you are a senior royal or a politician of some note, to be invited round to someone's house where there are women there, and presumably, I realise it's tea time on the radio, but presumably in the interest of acting out whatever sexual proclivity you have.
That is correct, right? And that may have included legal sex activities, right? But even if those legal sex activities were in fact legal, right, we don't want our politicians or public officials to be conducting themselves like this, right? So, as a lawyer and a former prosecutor here, I think it's helpful for people to understand where consequences will and will not occur and what you can yourself do to try to advance some of these things. You should not count on the U.S. to prosecute any of the people in the UK you've been discussing. Well, it's not going to happen. Actually, I doubt that there are going to be any more real serious criminal prosecutions coming out of this at all. Because as I said, I think the government kind of had it right. And they said last summer that they had not seen any information that would allow them to charge someone else. Even if they come to change their mind, that statement alone will make it difficult for them to ever charge someone else. So realistically, I don't see much happening in the U.S. here. But things can happen in other countries, but I wouldn't count on the U.S. And I think that the most serious repercussions, to the extent people are disgusted by the sorts of things you've been talking about and the socializing you've been talking about, should be reputational, business pressure, things like that. Don't go to the businesses that are run by so-and-so. Don't be on the social media platform run by Elon Musk if you're disgusted by his connections with Jeffrey Epstein. These are real consequences that you actually can impose on these officials in the absence of more sort of direct and maybe even satisfying legal consequences.
Live to the House of Commons, where Darren Jones, the Prime Minister's Chief Secretary, is speaking about the Epstein file release. Let's listen in.
As the House knows, Peter Mandelson is no longer a member of the Labour Party, having resigned his membership last night, and the House may wish to know that disciplinary action was underway by the Labour Party prior to his resignation. The Prime Minister believes, as does the government, that Peter Mandelson should not retain his membership of the House of Lords or use his title. As the House already knows, the government does not have the power to remove peerages without legislation. However, the Prime Minister is calling on all political parties, including the Conservatives as the largest party in the House of Lords, to work with the government to modernise the disciplinary procedures to allow for removal of peers who have brought the House of Lords into disrepute. The government will today write to the appropriate authorities in the other place to start that process. It would be better, Madam Deputy Speaker, to update those procedures so that they apply to all members of the House of Lords, instead of having to introduce complex hybrid bills for each individual peer who has brought the other place into disrepute.
Darren Jones, the Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister, saying that the government is going to look at changing the law to give the government the ability to sack peers. Presumably that is what they want to do to Peter Mandelson, although I'm not sure they're going to get it through in time. Let's just have a listen into what the opposition have to say. This is Alex Burkhardt on his feet.
It is, of course, a great embarrassment to our country that its most senior ambassador should have been caught up with a man like him. In this latest set of releases from the US Department of Justice, it's clearer than ever that theirs was a relationship built not just on affection, but on the transfer of money from Epstein to Mandelson's family and the transfer of information from Mandelson to Epstein. In some cases, this was apparently market-sensitive information that Mandelson only received by dint of being a member of the Labour government. So, of course, we welcome the belated announcement that there will be an investigation into Mandelson's conduct whilst he was a minister. But this should have happened long ago, and I say that because we know that in February last year, Gordon Brown, the former Prime Minister, wrote to the Cabinet Secretary explicitly asking for an investigation into the veracity of information contained in the Epstein papers about the sale of assets arising from the banking collapse and communications about them between Lord Mandelson and Mr. Epstein. That investigation never happened.
Alex Burkhardt speaking for the Conservatives in response to what you've just heard from Darren Jones. I mean, I have to say one of the things that I find a little hard to believe, Ankush, is the idea that the government, having not known about the nature of alleged financial transactions or indeed about the communications with Epstein from Mandelson, are now going to launch an inquiry to find all available information. Presumably there isn't any.
Look, a serious point on this. This is one of the major obstacles, and always was, to the idea that like we could generate a whole bunch of criminal cases out of this disclosure. Too much time has passed. The information is too fragmented. It would be much more difficult than people seem to think. But I do want to say, like, it is nice to hear robust, direct, clear, cited sort of criticism of public officials, and because in the U.S. this has been a big muddle.